I want to cover 8 problems that you have to solve if you want to get a college athletic scholarship. And your kid probably just wants to play at the next level. But you, as the parent, you probably want some money of some kind to subsidize the cost. And so I've talked to thousands of parents over the last year, and many of them are struggling with these problems. And so if they are, there's a good chance that you are too. So let's just dive right in. The first one is what I call the desert problem. And the desert problem is, if you can imagine a wanderer who is out in the middle of the desert, think like the Sahara, where it's a bunch of sand dunes and there's nothing else around. And that wanderer, even though they're out in the middle of the desert, they have a blindfold on, they have earmuffs on, so they're protecting against the wind, and they don't have a map, they don't have a compass, they have no idea where they're going, how they're gonna get there. They're just out in the middle of nowhere. And a lot of families find themselves in this position in college recruiting because they've never been through the process before, or they had a kid who went through it, but that was a number of years ago, and the recruiting process has changed. Or maybe you, as the parent, have been through the recruiting process yourself, but that was many years ago, and nowadays the recruiting process is quite different. And so a lot of families find themselves in this area where they have no idea how to navigate college recruiting. And sometimes families don't even necessarily know where they're trying to go. They don't have a goal or a destination. They just know my kid wants to play in college, and that's about as far as they've gotten. But even if you have a destination, if you don't have a plan or a strategy or a roadmap to get there, then you're simply hoping that it's just going to work out. And that's where a lot of families are in college recruiting. And nowadays, with the transfer portal, with NIL, with roster caps, with all these things working against you, the process has gotten significantly harder. And so you need to come in prepared. If you simply think that this is just going to happen, you're probably going to be sorely mistaken. And so to solve the desert problem, usually the answer is education or information of some kind. You don't know how to navigate the process, and so you need to learn how to navigate the process. And that either comes through lots of different research across, free platforms like Google or social media. It comes from paying somebody like us, right? And so you have to find some way to learn about how the recruiting process actually works so that you can get information and education so that you can get to the destination that you're looking to get to. Now, this often leads to the second problem. And the second problem is what I call the paralyzed problem. Now, the paralyzed problem piggybacks on the desert problem. Why? Because what ends up happening is that a lot of families are in the desert problem and they don't know how to navigate college recruiting. So what they do is they go get a bunch of information. They educate themselves on the recruiting process. And what this leads to is the realization of how much work it takes to succeed in recruiting and the level of quality that you need in order to succeed and how intentional and strategic you have to be about the process. And when that hits a parent and how hard this is going to be in terms of workload, in terms of all the factors that are working against you, a lot of families become paralyzed because you could be in the middle of the desert and you can have a destination that you want to get to and you can have a roadmap. And as soon as your roadmap tells you how far you have to go to get to your destination, you might say, it's that far? I don't know if I even want to go there anymore. And that's what a lot of families find themselves in, that type of situation where they now realize how difficult this is going to be and they become paralyzed and they're not even sure really where to start. And this is where that old cliche comes in, which is, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? And that's really the solution to the paralyzed problem is you have to start somewhere. And even if that's taking the smallest little steps in the right direction, just getting some sort of momentum, making some sort of progress, checking off some boxes on a list is going to give you the confidence to continue along that path because, yes, college recruiting is hard. Yes, sometimes it takes longer than you would expect. But if you put in the right actions consistently over a long period of time, you're very likely to succeed. And so a lot of times that desert problem leads into the paralyzed problem. And so the first solution for the desert problem is information education. And the solution for the paralyzed problem, I think I said the desert problem. I think I said that right. The solution for the paralyzed problem is action, right? You need to actually act even in the face of being scared of how much work is in front of you or that you're going to do it wrong. You have to get started because if you can't get started, you're not going to make any progress. Now, the third problem is what I call the running out of the house problem. Now, This is really about urgency because what happens in recruiting for a lot of families is that they start junior year and they think, all right, we have 2 full years to make this happen. That feels like a lot of time. And so a lot of families say, all right, we're going to try and do this on our own before we go hire somebody else for a whole bunch of money. So they try it on their own for 3 months, 6 months, sometimes longer than that, 12 months. And they're trying it and they're trying it. And then it just doesn't work out for them. So senior year, they say, all right, you know what, Jack, we need some help. We're ready. So they come to us. But the problem is that the scenario has changed. The situation is not the same. So now it's much later in the process, so it's harder. You're probably talking about different schools, lower level schools, because a lot of D1s are going to have their rosters filled at that point. Maybe less scholarship money, right? There's other things, and maybe that's not true, right? You have second semester seniors who are getting big scholarships, even some of them to D1 schools. But it's simply going to be harder, and there's really no arguing against that. And so the running out of the house problem, what this is so a lot of families, think about when you are at your house, right? And you say, all right, you know what? I have this event that I have to get to, and I know that I need to leave by noon in order to get there. And so for a lot of people, noon rolls around and they go, all right, it's time for me to go. And they know exactly when they need to leave. It's not a factor of when am I supposed to leave? No, they know when they're supposed to leave. But noon rolls around and they go, okay. And so they get up, they put on their shoes, and then they go, oh, well, I need to go get my wallet. I need to go get my keys. Oh, you know what? I should probably bring a jacket. Oh, you know what? I need to go to the bathroom. And by the time that they actually walk out the door, it's 12:10. It's 12:15. And all of a sudden, they're 10 to 15 minutes late. And so this happens in recruiting a lot, which is where families say, you know what, we're going to wait 6 months. We're going to try this on our own. And at 6 months, that's when we're really going to hit it hard in case it doesn't work at that point, right? And 6 months comes along, but what families don't realize is that you're not just going to be able to ramp up immediately after those 6 months, right? Because there's a lot of legwork that has to be taken before you can actually start ramping things really hard. So if you do that for 6 months and you're like, all right, this is when we really need to kick it into gear, but then you have to build out your recruiting videos in an intentional way, and that takes time, and you have to have a lot of them. And you have to put together a target list of schools, and you have to get the contact info for those schools. You have to set up email systems. You have to build out your social media profile, and all of those things take time. And if you're not prepared because you didn't understand that, then instead of when you think, all right, I'm going to start in 6 months, you might end up starting in 7 or 8 or 9, and now you're pushing it back, right, by the time that you actually get to ramp, which means that you are missing opportunities. And so I call this the running out of the house problem, which is that a lot of families don't realize the position that they're putting themselves in because they think they can just turn it on in a switch. But the problem is that time is the most valuable asset that you have in recruiting. You don't get it back. And in recruiting, there are a limited amount of scholarship opportunities. And every day that passes by, the process gets harder and there are less of them. Do not mess around with time because you cannot get it back. You cannot get time back unless you're going to reclass or you're going to take a gap year or you're going to transfer. You're going to go to a JUCO and transfer or another school and transfer out. But unless you're going to do one of those dramatic things, you don't get time back. And so a lot of families run into this running out of the house problem. They wait too long and then they're disappointed when they have to have conversations about the types of schools that are on the table or off the table or the types of scholarships that are available now, and it's all because they thought they were going to leave at noon, but really they didn't end up leaving until 12:10 or 12:15. The fourth problem is what I call the $3 versus $30,000 problem. And in recruiting, there's a lot of different things that you can do to try to get on college coaches' radars, right? You can send emails, you can post on social media, you can DM coaches, you can go to recruiting events, you can have your coach call coaches for you, right? There's lots of different ways that you can get exposure in college recruiting. And so if there are 100 different ways to get on college coaches' radars, I'm going to be I was going to say the bearer of bad news, but this is actually great news, and that is that there's really only like 5 of the 100 that actually matter, right? 95% of things that parents are doing in the college recruiting process to try and help their kid are actually a waste of time. And so what ends up happening is parents are trying to do these hundreds of things, and they say, man, there's just not enough time in the day to do all of this. I agree with you. It's because you're doing 95% of the things are wrong. They're not going to make any progress for you. They're not going to help you when if you just focused on the 5 things that actually matter, you could ignore the other 95 entirely and you would probably get not the same results, but better results because you have a higher level of concentration on the few things that actually move the needle. And so I call this the $3 versus $30,000 problem because a lot of parents are focusing on $3 questions. They're asking things like, well, should my highlight video be 3 minutes or should it be 5 minutes, right? They're asking things like, well, should my subject line include our GPA and should it include all these different things? They're asking $3 questions, not $30,000 questions. I'm stealing this from a financial guy. His name is Ramit Sethi, and he talks about this in terms of finances. And he says, people worry about spending $3 on coffee when if they would simply focus on implementing an investment strategy that allowed them to get $30,000 over the course of a year or 5 years or 10 years, then it would basically make the $3 coffee question insignificant. It wouldn't matter. And so he says people are focusing on $3 questions rather than $30,000 questions. And I love that. And I think it absolutely applies to the college recruiting process, where so many families are focusing on small things that do not move the needle for you at all. And instead, they focus on instead focusing on things that aren't going to do anything for you. I think I just messed that up, but you understand. They're focusing on things that don't matter when if they just focused on the 3 to 5 things that actually matter, they would get better results. And so the solution to this, and you're not going to like this, but the solution to this is literally getting the information and the advice from someone who has been there and done that, who can tell you what the 95 things are that don't matter. And there's not really a good way to do that. The only other way that you can do that is by trial and error. And of course, you can do that with trial and error. The problem is that trial and error takes time. And we just talked about how important time is and how you can't get that back. And every day gets harder in the recruiting process. And so you got to find somebody who can show you, hey, these are the 95 things that don't matter. And these are the 5 things that if you just focus on these, you're going to get better results. This is the 5th problem. It's what I call the 6-pack problem. So the 6-pack problem has to do with volume. So I want to imagine someone who wants to go work out, right? They want to get in really good shape. And, I'm filming this on December 5th. So we're getting ready for New Year's resolutions. A bunch of people are going to go get gym memberships and then probably cancel them in February. But that's neither here nor there. The point of the 6-pack problem is when someone is trying to get in shape, I can give them, or someone, I don't know why I said someone can give them a great workout plan. Right? And we can say, this is exactly what you should do for your upper body. This is what you should do for your lower body. This is what you should do for your core. And they have a perfect plan, right? If they only work out once a week, then even with the perfect plan and the perfect execution of that plan, right? They do all the exercises with perfect form, exactly as their coach tells them to do. But if they only do it once a week, they're probably not going to see great results, even though they're doing everything perfectly. Why is that? Because you need greater volume of work. Like you need to work out 3 times a week or 4 or 5 times a week in order to actually see the benefits of doing that workout. It's not just the quality of the workouts. Are you doing the right exercises? It's not just that. It's how many of them are you doing and how often are you doing them? And so a lot of families run into the 6-pack problem, which is that they might have really good recruiting video. They might have a great email script. They might have a great social media presence. What they lack is volume. They are not doing these things at a volume that is great enough to make a significant impact. And the problem is that a lot of parents have a dramatically lower expectation of how much volume is required in recruiting than what is actually required. There's a lot of families who think that you need to contact 20 or 30 schools. This is not enough. It's not enough. And I have lots of other videos about why that's the case. You can go check those out. Probably not lots of other videos, maybe 1 or 2 other videos, but I would go watch those videos because it's simply not going to be enough. If you have 1 3-minute highlight video, it's not going to be enough. And so this is the 6-pack problem where even if you are doing the right things, if you're not doing them with enough volume, you're going to have issues and you're not going to get the results that you are looking for. And so a lot of times what helps with this is for someone who can reset your bar. And hopefully I can do that for you right now or in some of those other videos. Reset your bar of what is required to get the results that you are looking for. We start with, in the first email campaign for a family, we start with a bare minimum of 50 schools. And to be honest with you, if someone comes in with 50 schools that they want to contact, we push them hard to get to 100. So we want 100 in the first campaign, and then we'll contact upwards of 200, 300, even 500 schools to make this happen. That is the level of volume that is required to get the results that you are looking for. And so I just want to reset your bar there, because a lot of families run into the six-pack problem where they have quality. I wouldn't say a lot of families, because it's hard to have really high quality in some of this stuff if you've never done it before. But even if you have high quality, if you don't have the volume, you're still not going to be able to see those results, just like if you were in the gym. The sixth problem is what I call the leaky bucket problem. Okay. Now, I personally love the leaky bucket problem because it exposes a lot of people who think that they know what they're doing in college recruiting. So here's what the leaky bucket problem is. When you think about a bucket, right, and you pour water into it, if you have a hole in the bucket, the water's just going to keep coming out the backside. And there's a lot of families that are experiencing this in college recruiting. So what's happening is they have shown that they are capable of generating interest. They can send emails to coaches and get responses. They have conversations with college coaches going, but a lot of those conversations end up fizzling out. College coaches ghost them. They don't lead to anything meaningful. And so I call this leaky bucket because they're pouring in interest. They have no problem getting interest, but it keeps coming out the backside, and they're never able to actually take it to the next level. You know, one of the ways that I talk about this is if you think of a scale from like 0 to 100, 0 is you're nowhere with coaches, right? They don't know who you are. And 100 is a scholarship. And so we need to move from 0 to 100 with as many schools as possible. And so what happens is a lot of families go from like 0 to 20 because they send an email, the coach watches the video, they like it, they're like, this looks pretty good, and they positively respond. And so they don't go from 0 to 100 because not a lot of coaches are going to watch one video of a kid and go, yes, here's an offer right away based on one video. It's just probably not going to happen. And so they're not going to go 0 to 100, but they'll go like 0 to 20. Right? And so what happens is that there's a lot of parents who believe that they are actually at like the 90% mark, right? They believe, well, now that we have interest, we just need a little bit of help, right? We don't need the whole thing. We just need a little bit of help because they believe that they are, at the 90% and they only have 10% to go, when really they're probably at like 20%. Right? And they still have 80% to go, because generating interest in recruiting is actually not the hard part. The hard part is being able to turn that interest into real opportunities, because you have to do it for a very long period of time. And you are now directly competing with all the other players that coach is recruiting at the same time, because they're not just going to recruit one player for your kid's position in grad class. They're going to recruit multiple at the same time so that they can pick the best one. And so you are directly competing against those other players. And if those players are doing things that you're not doing, it's going to be very difficult for you to compete with them. When I say things that they're doing that you're not doing, things that are building the relationship, they're following up with them, they're providing more video, they're doing things that maybe you haven't considered doing or you haven't set aside the time to do. And that's making it harder for you to turn that 20 into 100 and get the offers that you're looking for. And so there's a lot of families who think, we just need like a little bit of help. No, like it's actually not crazy hard to generate interest if you know what you're doing. It's harder to take that interest and turn it into an offer. And so a lot of families have that leaky bucket where they can get the interest, but it just comes out the other side. And so here's the really dangerous part about the leaky bucket problem. It gives you a false sense of security and progress. So let's say that you're a junior, right? And it's first semester of junior year and you generate some interest. Okay, that's awesome, right? And you're all hyped, you're excited. And then what happens is as you get into the second semester of junior year, all those schools have kind of fizzled. And you're like, that was kind of weird. Like I thought that we were going to be further ahead by then. And so then you go back and you start to generate interest again. But what's happened? What's happened is that you've now lost 6 to 12 months of time. And so you thought that you were making progress, but really you weren't. And so not only are you losing that interest, you're going back to the start And you're not just at zero, you've now lost time. So it is harder than it was when you first did it. And so this is the challenge of the leaky bucket, is it gives you this false sense of security that you're making progress, but you're actually making it harder on yourself than before. And so to solve that leaky bucket, you have to be able to build relationships with coaches over a longer period of time. Because if you're not able, especially now with the transfer portal, a college coach can go to the transfer portal and get a college kid who's bigger, faster, stronger, has college experience, and is going to be able to play and perform and make an impact the very next year. College coaches can just go get that kid. So why would they take a high school kid over that kid? Now, they're still recruiting high school kids, but what they want to see is they want to evaluate high school players for a longer period of time than they ever wanted to before. And so it's no longer like, oh, they, watch your video, they like it, and then within a month you have an offer. It happens sometimes, but only for like the top players. For most people, they're going to have to build relationships over 5, 6, 7, 8 months, right? Sometimes even more than that. And so if you're not able to do that, those coaches are going to drop off and you're going to have that leaky bucket and you're going to end up in a very, very difficult recruiting situation. All right, the seventh problem is what I call the ugly stepsister. And the ugly stepsister is where a family has some interest in offers. Maybe you got a couple offers, right? You got 2 or 3 offers, but you're not really excited about them. These aren't schools that you are pumped up about. You're glad that your kid has somewhere to play. It's nice to get some scholarship money, 20 grand, 50 grand, sometimes more than that. It's really nice, but these aren't exactly schools that you're ready to pull the trigger on right now. And so what happens with the ugly stepsister is that sometimes those schools start putting expiration dates on those offers. They start saying, all right, we need an answer by next week, or we need an answer by this date in a month or two, right? And so you feel the weight of that. And at the same time, you are trying to determine, well, do we go out and try to get more interest, right? How are we supposed to balance both of these things at the same time? And what happens here with the ugly stepsister is that a lot of families, through the communication with college coaches, unknowingly give coaches reasons to put an expiration date on those offers. If a coach doesn't put an expiration date on an offer, then it's going to give you the freedom to really go out and contact a whole bunch more schools and see if you can generate more opportunities. Basically buys you time. But if you're not able to do that, then what ends up happening is you get in this rock and a hard place situation where they're bearing down on you to commit to this school, and you really don't want to do that because you're not excited about it, but you also know that if you take the risk and you go out to try to generate more interest, there's a good chance that this scholarship offer goes out the window, and now this better work. Like, you better find another opportunity because you just lost your only one. And so there's a risk that this might be worse than the opportunities that you got over here, or even, dare I say it, you might not even get any. Right? You might not even get any. And I know a family, I had talked to them, this was a while ago, 6 months ago, 8 months ago, I had talked to them, and they got some offers out of high school, and they were pretty, lackluster offers. They weren't really that excited about them. And so the kid reclassed, and he had, they're like, all right, we're going to do this one more year and see if we can get really good D1 offers. The second year that they went through it, they didn't get a single offer. Right? Not only did they not get better offers or as good offers or even lesser offers, they didn't get a single offer. And so that is the rock and a hard place situation, the ugly stepsister that a lot of families find themselves in. Now, the first thing that I would say is that you want to build leverage so that you're never in this situation. You want to generate so much interest in offers that you are always safe, that if one school decides, nah, we're not interested anymore, then you say, yeah, whatever, I still have 10 schools, 15 schools that I'm talking to or that I have offers from. That's really where you want to be, because it makes this a much easier road. But if you're not in that position, then you have to ask yourself, what consequence am I willing to live with? Am I willing to accept this offer from the school that is not my favorite, but I'd rather do that than risk not having anything? Or would you rather say, you know what, I'd rather live with the consequence that we tried everything we could to get to a school that we loved and it simply didn't work out. And so you have to ask yourself, what is the consequence that I'm willing to live with? But in an ideal world, you never get to this ugly stepsister problem because you've built up so much leverage from doing all the right things and solving all these problems that we just talked about before, so that you are the one who holds the cards at the end of the process. That's really where you want to be. And then this last problem, Last problem is what I call the glass ceiling problem. And the glass ceiling problem is more than anything a believability problem. And it essentially sets limits on what a family thinks is possible based on the family's skill sets. So there's a family, right, who has only been able to get, lower level offers, or maybe not even offers. They've only been able to get a couple email responses or something like that. And they believe that that is just the best that they can do, that they're never going to be able to get anything higher than that. But what they don't realize is that there's levels to the game, right? There are people who know how to make recruiting videos better than others or send emails better than others, those types of things. And that if they simply did things better, they would actually blow past that glass ceiling, and that they would actually be capable of much more than they thought. And so this presents itself in many different ways. I mean, there are families that we work with who say, you know what, our kid is not a D1 caliber player, so we shouldn't contact any D1 schools. And I said, well, are there D1 schools that you're interested in? And many families say, well, I mean, yeah, but we just don't think our kid can play there. And we're like, why wouldn't we contact them anyway? If they don't respond, they don't respond. Let's see what happens. And a lot of families are surprised when D1 schools start to express interest. They're like, man, we never would have thought to contact those schools. They had put a glass ceiling on what they thought was possible. And families do this in a lot of different ways. They believe that, we've sent all the emails that we possibly can, so, that must be it. And usually, almost always, if the kid is good enough to play at a certain level, you can get them there, right? You can get them there. You just have to figure out where the bottleneck is. What is it that's holding someone back from being able to accomplish that? And so this glass ceiling problem, you have to admit sometimes that it's possible that you don't know as much as you thought you did, and that if you were doing things a little bit smoother, a little bit cleaner, a little bit better, then maybe you would be capable of much more than you ever thought. And I see this glass ceiling so often because it happens with coaches too. Coaches look at players and they're like, travel coaches, your kid is a D3 caliber player. Maybe, maybe not. Your kid might be a D2 or D1 player. And you know what? The only opinion that matters is that of college coaches. My opinion doesn't matter. Your opinion doesn't matter. Your high school travel club coach's opinion doesn't matter. The only opinion that matters is college coaches, because they're the ones who write the checks. And so I just believe in throwing away the glass ceiling and putting your kid in front of as many college coaches as possible and seeing what the market says. What do college coaches say? Because ultimately, that's where that's where all the money is won, and that's the only thing that really matters. So hopefully you learned a little bit about these 8 problems and which ones you might be struggling with and what that step is going to be for you to start getting out of that problem. If you're not sure how to get out of these problems and you want to work with someone like us, you can schedule a call in the description with us. We'll walk you through what we do and how we help families. Otherwise, I will see you guys next time.